Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Facebook Live discussion. My name is Maura Clancy. I'm here at Chisholm and Kilpatrick in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm joined today by Carrie Baker and Lindy Nash, also of Chisholm and Kilpatrick. Today we are talking about VA math. Before we get into the topics we have prepared for you today, just a few preliminary things. First, we will be taking any questions that anyone wants to ask that you are able to leave in the comments feed next to this video. So we'll do our best to get to some of the questions that you ask, either by providing an answer from the live video today, or at least by posting any materials that we think would be helpful to you. And another thing that you can do to find additional materials on the topics that we discussed today, if for some reason they are not posted, which we'll try to do, is to visit our website at www.cck-law.com. We save a lot of our videos and blog posts there, so definitely check out those materials. So again, today we're talking about VA math. Lindy, why don't you start us off? Can you tell us how VA disability ratings work? So what does it mean to have a rating? What's the effect of it?
Sure. So basically a VA disability rating comes from, so say you're not service connected for anything, you've never filed a claim before. So you file your first claim, say for a knee condition that you think was due to service. Say that knee condition does get service connected, the VA will assign you a disability rating, ranging from 0 to 100 based on how severe your disability is. So that is kind of the gist of it. So every disability, assuming it gets service connected, will get a rating, and that will dictate the amount of monthly compensation that you get. So that is why it's so important. And usually the way it goes is, as I said, you'll file the claim, it'll get granted in what's known as a rating decision, and within that rating decision, that is where the rating will be assigned from the VA.
So ratings are decided by rating decisions, as Lindy said. What factors into the assignment of the rating? What does VA look at in order to determine what rating to give a service-connected disability?
Yeah, so VA will look at, or they're supposed to look at your whole C file. So everything ranging from exams to private treatment notes, in-service treatment records, lay statements, really anything that you've submitted within your time at the VA. That is what they should consider in assigning the disability rating. So it's a lot to look at, but that is what they're supposed to do.
And also, as Lindy mentioned, ratings are important because the rating percentage is associated with a certain monthly payment amount. So that is typically why we usually work very hard in increased rating cases, because there's a compensatory value attached to it.
Right. And so just to add on one more thing, typically, so kind of on the low end, a 10% rating this year is about $140. And then at the higher end, a 100% rating or a total disability rating is a little bit over $3,000. I think it's $3,057 right now. So obviously that's a huge gap, and that is why your rating is really crucial to your monthly compensation.
Great. And Carrie, tell us who it is at the VA that's doing the ratings, who's assigning the rating percentages for service-connected conditions?
Well, typically it's going to be your regional office rating specialist who sits down to rate the case. That's not in every scenario. If, for example, you receive a rating from the VA and you want to appeal it, you want a higher rating, the board of, if you appeal that up to the Board of Veterans Appeals, they too can assign a different rating than the regional office. But typically it's your rating specialist who's somewhat of a senior VA employee at the regional office.
And they base their ratings, from what I understand, on the VA rating schedule. Is that right?
Correct. They base the ratings on VA's rating schedule, which lists out thousands of disabilities that somebody could be service connected for, and each of those have different rates of severity. So you could have say a lumbar spine problem. It could be anywhere from 0% up to the highest it goes is 60%. There could be residuals from that are separate from the low back problem, such as radiculopathy down the extremities, and that could have another rating. So they use the rating schedule to assign the ratings, and the rating schedule itself is based on the average impairment of earning capacity, and that's been that way for decades, and that's the best way the VA has come up with to figure out what disabilities are worth how much compensation, and that's the average earning capacity across the spectrum. And that could be different for different people. A back disability might be a huge, as an example, a back disability might be a huge impact on someone's earning capacity if they're in a manual labor position. It may not be very much reduction of earning capacity if someone's in a very high-skilled, low-impact job. So they use the average of that to try to come up with the ratings.
That makes sense. And it's all based on how severe the condition is at the end of the day.
That's correct.
And the rating schedule also contains different diagnostic codes that are associated with different types of disabilities. So tell us about those diagnostic codes and how those are used in rating conditions.
So the diagnostic codes, if anybody wants to look up VA's schedule for rating disabilities, it's Title 38 in the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 4. And that the whole section, Part 4, is the VA's schedule for rating disabilities. And so you can look up, if you're service connected for something, you can look up and check that to see, well, this is what I'm rated. Are my symptoms compatible with this? And I think I probably got sidetracked from your actual question.
That's okay. So the original question was about diagnostic codes. So usually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but usually if you have a service-connected condition, they will choose a diagnostic code in the rating schedule that best contemplates the symptoms that you have due to your service-connected disability. So tell us about how many, there's a lot of different diagnostic codes and how those are used by the raters when they're issuing rating decisions.
So the diagnostic codes, and I don't know the total number of them, there's a lot. Think of every body system that you have. There's a group of diagnostic codes for that. So there's a group of diagnostic codes for musculoskeletal disabilities, another group of diagnostic codes for neurological disabilities, for pulmonary disabilities, for mental health disabilities. And so each group has multiple diagnostic codes under it. So, for example, there's a diagnostic code for lung cancer. There's only one diagnostic code for that. And if it's active lung cancer, then you're rated at 100%. If it's not active lung cancer, then you're going to go to the residuals. And you could end up getting rated under a different diagnostic code, than the original in that stage. And so it's also important for people to know to look for those diagnostic codes because they may have you rated under something that really, shouldn't, you might be more accurately rated under a different diagnostic code. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I should add, most veterans will not see the diagnostic code that's used because they put those on what's called the code sheet, which is a back page of the rating schedule. And they typically don't send the code sheet out to veteran claimants. They just don't include that as part of the rating decision. We think they should, but they don't.
Right. Yeah, and that can be helpful to know what diagnostic code is being used because, as you hinted at before, VA has a duty to maximize benefits. So if there are two potentially applicable diagnostic codes on the rating schedule that might apply to your condition, they're supposed to use the one that not only best contemplates your symptoms, but also yields the highest amount of compensation.
That's correct.
And in line with that, something you mentioned earlier was residuals. I think you were talking about lung cancer. Sometimes we see that VA bases their rating decisions on residuals of a condition. So for instance, residuals of a TBI. Those are also relevant in assigning ratings. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Lindy, what happens if you have multiple VA disabilities that all have different ratings? So say, taking Carrie's example, you have a lumbar spine disability that's at a 40% rating. You may also have tinnitus that's at a 10% rating. You might have a psychiatric condition that's at a 30% rating. How does VA come up with your monthly compensation when there are so many different ratings in play?
Right. So that's where VA math comes in. And I can't tell you how many of my clients call and they say, I don't understand. I have a 50% for PTSD and a 50% for sleep apnea. Why don't I have 100%? That's such a frequent thing. This is extremely confusing and complicated. And so that is why we're having this discussion for VA math, because it's not, your usual math. 50 plus 50 does not equal 100. So this is where combined ratings comes in. So basically, if you have numerous service-connected disabilities, all with different ratings, they do not combine the way that typical math works. So as I said, 50 plus 50 does not equal 100. It's also really hard to hit 100 on the scheduler rating. So I think that's why some veterans opt for a TDIU if they're unable to work, which is also 100% rating, because it's really difficult to hit 100. Even if you have multiple service-connected conditions, it's really hard to get there. And I think Carrie's going to get into how the math actually works, because it is complicated.
But before Carrie does that, the hardest part for sure of today's discussion. But to Lindy's point, if you have multiple different disability ratings, your monthly pay is based on your combined rating.
Yes.
So there can be individual ratings for different conditions, as we were talking about before, a rating for a lumbar condition, a rating for a tinnitus. Your monthly payment will be based on your combined rating, which Carrie is here to tell us about how VA math works. If 50 plus 50 doesn't equal 100, how is VA getting to the combined ratings? How are they figuring that out?
Well, let me first say, it kind of scares me a little bit when she says it's complicated, so Carrie's going to explain it. I grew up, born and raised in Kentucky, so you know how famous we are for our math skills. When I'm asked to explain it to somebody without a diagram, without VA's actual combined rating table, I explain it like this. They look at a person as a whole person. All right, you're a 100% whole person. And to Lindy's example, why doesn't 50 and 50 equal 100? So the easiest example I know to give is picture the veteran at 100%. So let's say you gave that veteran a service-connected disability rated at 90%. They subtract the 90% from the 100% of the whole person. That leaves 10% of a whole person left. So you've got a 90% disability rating, and that's what you're compensated at. You've got 10% of a whole person left. So what happens if you give that person another 10% disability for something else that's not related to the 90%? They take that 10% from the 10% of the whole person left. So you've got a 90% disability, 10% of the whole person left, add another 10% disability to that. They take that 10% from the 10% that's left of the whole person. 10% of 10 is only 1. They add that 1 to the 90%. Okay, so now technically your combined rating becomes 91, but they only pay in 10% increments. They round up at 5 and down at 4. So if you have a 91% disability, you're getting compensated at the 90% rate still. So that extra 10% did not change your combined rating. Now look at it with 4 different 10% in addition to the 90. All right, and Lindy said the higher you go on the rating schedule, the harder it is to get higher. Okay, 4 additional 10% is going to equal, on that type of math, equal 94% combined rating, and that's going to again pay you at the 90% rate. So even though you have a 90% disability rating for one disability and 4 10%, you're still going to get paid at the 90% rate. If you had 5 10%, it bumps it to 95. That rounds up to 100%. Or another way to look at it is you have that single 90% disability rating and you have a separate 50% disability rating. Just like those 5 10s, you're going to take that 50% of the 10% of the whole person left. That's going to give you 5. You take the 5 and you add it to the 90, which is the 90% disability. It gives you a 95% disability rating, which rounds up to 100. But that's the easiest way I can explain it. And if you want, I'll go over the combined ratings table. If you want to do that later, or
well, as you mentioned before, there is a table that's in the Code of Federal Regulations, 38 CFR Part 4. And the table is a way to figure out if you have a certain combined rating and then you have an additional rating added to that, you can utilize the table to figure out where your new combined rating will fall, whether it'll change, and if it does go higher, how much higher is it going. We also have, because this is clearly very complicated stuff, none of us really do this in our head all the time. If we can, then that's great. But we use a disability calculator that we actually have on our website. Again, our website is at www.cck-law.com. We will post a link to the calculator in the comments next to this video, but I use this all the time. I'm not sure about either of you, but
all the time.
Good. The calculator is a way to select all the different...
Carrie doesn't use it.
No.
Carrie doesn't use it, it's just me.
I use this.
Carrie sticks to the table. But the calculator is great because you'll see that there's all different percentages and you can check off what percentages apply to you. So if you have a list of disability ratings for individual conditions, you can click on them on the calculator, and once they're all accounted for, we have a function there that allows you to see what the combined rating is. So use the table, do it in your head if you want the challenge, or use the calculator. Either way, this is kind of a complicated concept.
And I think this is a good time, I'll go ahead and explain the table if you'd like. So like Mara said, the table is in Part 4, same section I cited earlier. To be more specific, it's Title 38 CFR Section 4.25. So if you go to that section in the CFR, you're going to find the VA's combined rating table. It looks similar to this, and I don't know if you can see this or not.
Very small numbers.
Yeah, I wouldn't try to,
We might be able to put it up. Yeah,
down,
I think the graphics
down one column, it has the various disability ratings. Across the other column, it has disability ratings that you would combine with it. So for example, if you had multiple disability ratings, this is important if you're going to use the table. And the only reason I don't use a calculator, because I've been using this for so long, it's just easier for me to do it. And I don't do it in my head, no way. So if you had a 20% disability rating, and well, let me say it a different way. Say you had a 50% disability rating, a 30% disability rating, and a 10% disability rating. You want to take those in the highest order down to the lowest. So you start with the 50% disability rating, and you find that on the very left-hand side of the paper. So once you find your 50%, and now you're going to want to combine 30% to that, because you have a 50, a 30, and a 10. You go towards the top column here, the top row has the percentages that you're going to combine to it. So you find your 50 down one side, you find your 30 down the other side. I'm looking at it from behind, and there's your 30, and then you come to where those intersect. And a 50 and a 30, according to the table, I don't have the whole table here. You go across. So you find it, and that's 65. All right, so a 50 and a 30 is going to be a 65% disability. That's going to pay you at the 70% combined rate. But we've got another one. We got that 10% to combine with it too. So once you find the 50 and the 30, which is 65, you go back to the column on the far left, and you go down to 65. And once you find that 65, you want to combine that other 10% to it. You go over one row, because that's the row for 10%, and that gives you 69. And 69 still obviously pays at the 70% rate since it rounds up. So that's generally how you use that.
And one more, even more complicated question for you, Carrie, about calculating the combined rating is about the bilateral factor.
Yes.
Can you tell us what the bilateral factor is and how it works?
Okay, so the bilateral factor is the one, if you have a bilateral factor that you're going to use, that's going to be the one time where you're not going to follow what I just said, take your highest rating first and the next highest and the next highest and combine them up. If you have something that's going to be applicable to the bilateral factor, you have to compute that first. All right, so how would that work? A bilateral factor is anytime you have a compensable rating, for example, to bilateral extremities. So if I had both my elbows were in bad shape, and I had a 10% disability rating for each one of them. All right, a 10 and 10 is a 19. Okay, so the first thing you have to do with those two bilateral factors, let me back up. Say I have a 10% for each elbow, and an additional 50% for something unrelated, post-traumatic stress disorder, heart condition, whatever the case may be. That 50% is not part of a bilateral factor. Bilateral factors only include bilateral extremities as an example. And you have to have a compensable rating on each extremity, in other words, 10% or more on each extremity in order for the bilateral factor to apply. So if I had 10 and 10 on each elbow, then that's going to be combined to a 19. All right. You take 10% of that, which is 1.9 in the case of 10%, and you add it back to that 19. So with and once you add 19 and 1.9, you get 20.9. I'm doing my math right, and that rounds up to 21. So that's your bilateral factor. So instead of having a combined 20%, even though it's technically 19 for say 2 elbows at 10% each, you really have 21. And that's where you start. On the left column, you take 21, you go down and find 21, and then you combine your other disability that doesn't have anything to do with the bilateral factor, which in that case, in that scenario was a 50%. So you go down to 21, you go across to 50%, that gives you your total rating. So anytime there's a bilateral factor, you always do that first. It's 99